Hello, hello. How's everybody doing? All right, we're hoping that the microphone likes us tonight. I have a second one if this one has issues. Thank you so much for being here. I absolutely love when we quite literally pack everybody into this room. There's just, we have events at different off-site locations, but there's something extra special and fun about having it in the bookstore and just this intimacy of everybody who's here, who's excited for this author and for this book, and it just changes the whole energy. So thank you again for being here. My name is Shalene. On behalf of the booksellers at the King's English Bookshop and Brain Food Books, I welcome you to our event with Mark Danielewski. The King's English Bookshop has been on the corner of 15th and 15th for 48 years, matching books to readers, and we are so very grateful for your loyalty. Brain Food Books, the official not-for-profit partner of the King's English Bookshop, is grateful to you and is assisting in fulfilling its mission to get books into the hands of those without regular access. A portion of all book sales from this event actually goes towards Brain Food Books. In the last 3 years alone, we have distributed over 59,000 books to the underrecognized community, and we couldn't have done it without you. So round of applause for yourself. Please take a moment and silence your cell phones, but don't feel the need to put them away. We know technology, so take the picture, take the video. If you post it online, tag us, tag Mark, get the word out of this really fabulous book, brag about it, all the fun things. So it is now my privilege to introduce our guest for this evening. So Mark Z. Danielewski was born in New York City and lives in Los Angeles. He is the author of the award-winning and best-selling novel House of Leaves, National Book Award finalist Only Revolutions, and the novella The 50-Year Sword, which has performed on Halloween 3 years in a row at Red Cat. His books have been translated into multiple languages, and his work has been the focus of university classes, literary events, and this is one of my personal favorite tidbits, has even been on display at the Guggenheim Museum during its Storylines exhibition. After Pantheon released the 5-volume installments of The Familiar between 2015 and 2017, the New York Times declared Danielewski America's foremost literary magus. His other books include The Little Blue Kite, The Whalestone Letters, and now Tom's Prophecy. We also have the poetry collection that he did the forward with. We have 2 copies of those, so those are both of that as well. But now Tom's Prophecy. So please join me in welcoming Mark as he shares more about this latest release.
How are we doing? It's my first reading tour stop for Charles Carson, so it's cool. It's very cool. And still learning how to talk about Tom's Crossing. Seems the thing everyone's referring, or calling it now, is a brick. I have a friend, he turned to AI, because that's what you do in these circumstances, and AI declared that a brick is something that weighs between 4 and 5 pounds. So then he took a picture of Tom's Crossing on a scale, and it's 3.1 pounds. And then he texted, not a brick. So we have that. And actually, I'm kind of, just as we start to figure out what this book is, I'm also still trying to figure out what this particular gathering is. I mean, it's called a reading, and for 25 years, that's what I treated it as a reading. And when I started doing this, I would read for an hour. I know, I see blood pressure rising. An hour. And then later, I thought I was being really sort of gentle by easing back to 30 minutes. But then recently I was talking to some booksellers and bookstores around my area. And I said, so what's the longest reading? And they were like, 10 minutes. And they were like, 10 minutes is too long. 3 minutes. I said, for a reading, 3 minutes. So then I started to think, well, maybe I'll read for 2 hours. That'll be interesting. It'll be, I mean, most people will they'll fail, right? They'll get exhausted and they'll have to leave. And whoever's left, I'll sign their books. And I did work through this in my head, and then I realized it's not going to work. Because everyone's smart here, and they're going to just go outside and wait. They'll have a party, you guys will order pizza, donuts, whatever, and someone will go in and out and oh yeah, he's done. Okay, now we can sign books. And it's also silly because everyone here, if you know who I am, if you know my books, you're all beautiful, expert readers. And by the way, if you've just wandered in and you don't know my book, welcome. You're on your way to being beautiful, expert readers, and there are many, many good readers here. And you don't need me to read to you. That said, I'm going to read to you. But I'm only going to read 2 pages, okay? It's going to be a short reading. I know. Don't worry, because I've been thinking about this, obviously. Because then I began to wonder, so is this a performance, right? In some ways, right? It's kind of like, and I was thinking, like, well, when you have a gathering like this, you usually have a musician who's going to play a song. Or you're going to have a comedian who's going to make you laugh or something theatrical. Or maybe a lecture. This is not a lecture, so you don't have to worry about that. No grades. And I was thinking, well, that's problematic. Because this is aftermath. The performance is done. It's right there. That thing took me 5, 6, 7 years to write. Maybe 10, if you want to go back to like early origins. And I will tell you, it's a lifetime. It is the best thing that I have ever written. And I say that thank you. I say that matter of factly, but also with some melancholy, because I know I'll never write that well again. And I'm not saying that in a dramatic fashion. I'm saying that in a way that an athlete knows their limits. They know they've reached the very edge of what they can do. 1,232 pages. To keep that alive in my mind took me the very limits of everything that I could. So I would like to suggest that this is more of like a gathering around a campfire. All right? So we can use our collective imagination to put a campfire right here, not on you, sir. We'll put it over here. With all that metaphysical glow of perspective, so we can enjoy the end of this day. We can take a load off. And we can listen. And we can ask some questions. And we can tell stories. And what I will do is as best as I can, I will share with you a little bit of the journey that was required to get here. But first, let's do the reading, okay? And it is a reading, and maybe it's a little performance, because I am going to put on that hat. And I am going to introduce a little bit of a twang, because those of you who don't know this is a Western, all right? And I'm going to read something that my daughter, who's 7, says is a very good thing to read. All right? So it's a sweet little story. But I will warn you, this is not necessarily a sweet book. I mean, it's for the adults in the room. And I will tell you, it's haunting. For real. You read this book, you will ride with the dead. You will ride with your own death. And there is peace to be found, but if you make it, it's up to you. I know, when you put on a hat like this, you do kind of become a different person. I'll tell you a little later what it's like to write this book. But this is about a horse named Jojo. Does anyone know anything about horses here? Woo! A little? No. It's the Utah I grew up in. Jojo was wild from the start, born with a hot wire in his heart. Folks admired him from foal to colt, mainly for his breeding. He was Arabian mostly. Maybe with some thoroughbred, some Mustang. He had black skin more beautiful than moonlight when it's pure and unfettered by any demand to reflect. With blacker hair and white ticking, Rabicano was the best fit. He sure weren't technically, as in genetically, the true roan. Not that it mattered. Everyone who saw Jojo just saw blue. He was powerful too, and stubborn. And when he was broken, though many agreed, he was never broken. He never sacrificed that preserving instinct to suddenly buck and bolt for no reason anyone could explain. Because of this unpredictable quality, he was kicked around from trailers to auctions to concrete-floored stalls to more trailers. And kicked around weren't just some expression. Too many folks landed kicks on his side, his flanks. And that wild creature of midnight blue took them insults and held on to them until they matured into a moment none could guess at. And then he kicked back. Jojo pretty much kicked every wall, gate, and ribcage if he could get close enough. Now and then he'd manage a good fight, too. By the time the Gatestones got him, you couldn't even approach Jojo without him rearing straight up, which Tom thought was funny as a comic book, though even he was cautious about getting too close. Their daddy, when he first set Jojo loose in their Indian Hills paddock, named him Crescent Moon because he spent more time in the air than on the ground. Landry, though, called him Jojo. She and Jojo arrived at the Gatestones at pretty much the same time. This was 1973, and they was both 6. Landry had never seen a horse except in tattered storybooks. And then one day, when Dallin weren't looking, little Landry slipped under the fence rail and ran to him, because, as she later put it, she wanted to hold the moon. Well, Tom's dad was none the wiser neither. How could he be? It weren't like he heard anything, not a scuffle, not a bump, and sure not one of them wild neighs that typically followed that big stallion going skyward. Who can remember what Dallin was doing at that moment? But like a good parent will quick enough notice when there's nothing to notice when there's a child around, well, that's usually when the trouble's in the making. Dallin didn't even think to look first to the paddock. She'd only been near his boots, near underfoot, and but moments ago, too. Now he was frantic, heading into the barn. And when he didn't find her there, why, he was looking around the truck, even down on his knees, looking under the truck. Only when he stood back up did he look to the paddock and behold his newly adopted daughter holding that blue crescent moon. She was just standing there with her arms wrapped around one leg, her head resting there too, not even tall enough to reach that horse's chest. Her eyes were closed. And do you think that big blue stallion was biting and kicking? Heck no. He was still as a statue. Well, that's not entirely true. Eventually he did lower his head to sniff some of her hair, and nostrils flaring maybe for the newness there. Or if you believe Charlene Kizis, who's from Orvov but wound up trying to put down roots near Edinburgh, he was catching in Landry's wild black ringlets a whiff of familiarity, a common ancestry, the spirit of goodness. Well, Tom didn't put it like that, but he did admit that Jojo's nostrils were drinking in something no man will ever send out, the recognition of a heart that would from that point on never leave his side, even if a grave stood between them. Clop, clop, clip, clop. Not that Dallin Gatestone the good, Dallin Gatestone the kind, Dallin Gatestone the calm could wonder any at this idol. He near lost his mind. That was one big mean horse towering over that tiny dim-witted girl. Whoa! He kept trying to huff out, already breathing too fast. whoa, like whoa was even needed. Well, with them two just not moving at all. Of course, despite his panic, Dallin weren't so foolish to go running out there either. He came in low and slow. He drew no attention. When he had about a dozen feet to go, why only then did Jojo raise his mighty head some, lifting to the leg that Landry weren't clutching, and stomping that down hard. Well, Dallin tried to get closer, but again Jojo lifted that free hoof and stomped down, this time twice. Thumps hard enough and loud enough to thump Dallin right in the chest. And Dallin was smart enough to back off. In fact, all the way to the fence, sitting on the top rail, just praying Sandra wouldn't drive up then, because she for sure would have, well, who knows what she would have done. Fortunately, Sandra didn't come roaring in then, nor did anyone else. And Dallin just sat there and watched and waited. And only then did what he was beholding finally start to sink in. The craziest embrace he'd ever seen. One of them special moments a life only gets a handful of, if that. One you'll never forget. And Dallin sure never forgot it. And Lord knows he told the story scores of times later. And we never did share how on that day tears had welled up in his eyes and streaked his cheeks. Dallin Gatestone never could say how long that hug lasted. The way he talked about it over the years, it was like it was still going on. And maybe it was. Thank you. Here is the performance. Questions? Discussion points? Yes, sir.
I think most of us that have read House of Leaves have heard the lore about how you wrote the first manuscript and tore it up. I was wondering if you could talk about that process. What would you say to yourself now and to the person then who tore that manuscript up? What have you learned since then?
Oh, well, there's a couple of things that are a little askew. I didn't tear up the manuscript for House of Leaves. It was a story / screenplay that I'd written for my father called Redwood, which in some ways became the basis for The Familiar. And it was a very dramatic and painful thing to do. And what would I say to that person? I don't know. I wonder if I would even recognize that person if I just was suddenly standing next to him. I mean, it's so difficult to tell my 7-year-old to brush her teeth, which totally makes sense. And so how could I say something to my former self that would register? And then would I want to? I mean, it was terrible. That was a terrible time. But at the same time, this is a great time right now. I mean, my wife looked at me and she said, "These are the good old days, Mark." And she was right. So I might just shut up and just say, "Hey, how are you, man?"
I think I haven't quite read anything like House of Leaves, and I'm wondering, was it a difficult process to try and find a publisher for it?
The question was whether it was difficult to find a publisher for House of Leaves. Yes, it was incredibly difficult. And it was a long process. Tom's Crossing has gone through at least 10 substantial drafts, and House of Leaves was no different. It was draft after draft. And then it was trying to interest an agent. That was the first step. And that was one of the critical moments, actually. I mean, I think as some of you know, I had originally created a PDF of House of Leaves, which in itself was a process. Now we can instantly create a PDF. Back then it took days and nights. There was a friend who was working at an ad company, and he basically let me use the computers to process this PDF. I mean, it was completely ungainly. And then I put it up on a website which had all these // tildes. It was a terrible website, but that's all you could do back then. And then I printed that address up on business cards at Kinko's, And then I went to bookstores, and all the books that I loved, I put that card between the pages. Did it help? I don't know. But traffic slowly started to build, and it was never enormous. But one of the things that happened was that we started to realize, and I use we loosely in terms of eventually the publisher, you know, friends and whatnot, that the people reading House of Leaves were all over the place. You know, there were dancers, there were police officers, there were executives. It was just all a kind of a mash of people like, what is this? And they were fascinated enough by the story that they got into it. Getting an agent was similar. You know, it was talking to people I know, sending out solicitations. I almost hesitate to tell this story because the path that I took is no longer relevant. Right? I mean, the only thing relevant if you're young writers is to write well. That will make a difference. But everything else goes its own way now. I don't know if you have to do it on TikTok or a new platform or whatever it is, Substack. It's difficult, you know? I mean, someone asked me about my agent, and I said, I haven't had an agent in years. I don't even know what that is anymore. But that was the process. And then my agent, very valiantly, went out to like 32 publishers. And all but one said no. So, you know. And then from there, it was still a long time of finishing the book, as was with Tom's Crossing. I mean, my poor editor, 1,232 pages. And by the way, this is the same editor I've had since 1997. 1,232 pages is a big, big book. That is a lot of work. And the manuscript he got was closer to 1,800 pages. So we cut out 400 pages, just so you know. Whew. I'm tired of thinking about it. Yes? My daughter did grow up alongside this book, yes. What kind of connection does my daughter have to that book? I don't know who she is, you know? The only thing I know for a fact is she has a lot of energy. I mean, if anything, maybe she has daddy's big engine. And that's a good thing, but it can tear right off the struts and just rip right out of the hood, so who knows? Yeah, of course, yeah. The book is alive. It's about two kids taking horses on a stupid dare into the mountains. But it's also about their mothers, and it's about the kids, and it's about the older people, and you know, it's a landscape that I see so vividly, and yet, you know, in some ways is I don't know, it's a grave marker for sort of the past that's ebbing away. But is her life there? Yeah, maybe the fragility. I think there's a lot of parents in the room. We all know that feeling. We're so excited when life comes into our household. No one tells us that death comes immediately. They're like, wait a minute, death has never been so close. I'm afraid at every single moment. Maybe my child's not going to make it through the day, through the night. Everything. And it never ends, you know? Then, oh wow, now she can swim. She's not going to drown, right? Oh wow, she's walking into traffic. It never ends, you know? And there it is. But I realize that you can try to keep denying that and try to move around it, but the way you do it, well, Francis Bacon had this wonderful, wonderful quote. He said, "Death is our friend, and those who have not entertained death will never be at home." And Tom's Crossing is very much about that. It is about understanding what death is, and it is about letting death come close. Because it's in those jaws of death that we understand life. We experience its brightness, its vividness, and we experience gratitude. We're like, I am so lucky to be here at this moment, that I can see this, that I personally can see you. Old friends, new friends, everything, this moment, that we get to see that. We have clawed out of the muck where we couldn't see but like a few moments or a few impulses away, and we can actually get perspective. And sometimes we can get grand perspectives, which is also what the book is. So maybe we climb higher, we climb harder, and suddenly there's a view of things. You'll have to read the book to get there. Yes.
saw you 13 years ago at San Francisco Swedish Mall.
Have I changed?
You look great. And that was beautiful, by the way, the NPR pianist and the whole 50-year story.
That was the 15-year sword.
That was
Yeah,
the 50-year
I remember
story.
that.
I went up to you and I said, hey, pretty, and you said you hadn't heard that in a really long time. And you signed our books beautifully, and I got a photo. I was just thinking, like, wow, it's been 13 years, and how did this magnum opus fit in over that time? So it's been like a decade since we've been working on it. So much has happened since then. Probably with social media, of course. So it's like, how did this?
Yeah.
How did you put this in?
It's a lifetime.
Yeah.
I mean, it's, as this gentleman remarked, it was aligned with my daughter's life, but it was also aligned with the pandemic. And by the way, outside of everything, I encourage everyone to talk about the pandemic. We still haven't found a way to talk about it. That was a really weird time. We were all isolated. We were doing weird things. I was spraying my hands in boxes and paper bags. I look back and I'm like, wow, that was me? And I know you all have stories. We lost friends. We lost lives, and it swept over the world. And there were stories everywhere that haven't been told. There's no monuments. There's nothing. It just kind of passed away into the way that's like, does it even exist? Like, did it happen? That weirdness. Tom's Crossing is definitely informed by that. I wrote a lot of it during the pandemic. I said, I gotta tell you, writers are made for pandemics. It's a harder life but I was like, yeah, I'm going into the mountains, and I would just disappear, even though I wasn't moving but feet away, and I was there. And in some ways, the book was inspired by a lot of the big books. It's like, yeah, you can try to fit things in. You can scroll quickly and you can glance over stuff. And you have to, because there's just so much stuff out there. But it's also good just to pick a good book. So one of my habits, and I created this habit. In other words, it wasn't an original habit. I had to work at it. Every single night, I read 2 or 3 pages from a big book. I've read War and Peace, Anna Karenina, Magic Mountain. I'm almost finishing Gravity's Rainbow, Knausgaard, Lonesome Dove, any big book. And I remember finding such comfort in that. I would always remind myself, I am not in a hurry to finish this book. I am going to sit with this book every night. I'm going to read other books during the day or maybe before I go to bed. But when I'm in bed, I turn on my little reading light and I read 3 pages. Now, that is definitely one way you can read Tom's Crossing. It will give you a lot of life. It will give you a lot of time. It will give you a lot of love and light. If you try to rush through it, I don't know what you're doing. That's not what this book is about. It is about enjoying its passages. And that way you will experience the passage. You will climb that mountain, page after page. And then you will be worthy of what you find at the top. Because there's something in the book there for you, but there's also what you will bring to that. As you bring these horses with you, and you take them to a better place. That's what I was doing, okay? That answers some of it. Yes.
So what do you think novels do?
What do novels do? I'm not afraid of this question. It's a great question. Read novels. As you get older, you're going to read biographies. You're going to read nonfiction. You're going to feel like I need to be more connected to where things are happening. Novels are made up. And it's weird. If you talk to a lot of novelists, I bet they would all agree that they are trying to reach some kind of truth. Now think about it. I would even say that's true. I'm trying to reach a truth here that resonates with all the readers. But I'm going to make it all up. All of it. I'm going to make it up. It's a fiction. So what is that? My theory. It's going to take 2 hours to explain. Is that your mind lights up differently when you're in the presence of something that you know is a story. Okay? Not something that's true, it requires documents, that you can look at pictures of people. Somehow you kind of abdicate the role of creator and you go, oh, there's someone out there who understands the history of this. This really happened. It's true. It's nonfiction. No, when you're with a novel, you alone are creating. You are imagining it, and that is strengthening your imagination. Right? Simple. Imaginations need to be strengthened. And what happens with a strong imagination? You can imagine not only your life, but the life of someone else. You cannot empathize with someone without imagination. You cannot walk in their shoes without imagination. So yes, novels have a moral purpose to strengthen what you can conceive of the world around you, those possibilities. And it unleashes such creative energy that you can then apply it to the dynamics of your home life, your professional life, your future moves. It brings space and freedom.
Yes. I felt like I had to read this book, just being born and raised in southern Utah. And it feels very specific that this takes place in Orville, Utah. And I'm very curious if at any point during the writing process was this Western meant to be spent somewhere else, or is it particularly meant to be placed here in Utah?
Yeah. I mean, I moved out here in the summer of 1975, and then left in '84. And I have to say, I just love the mountains. And I love northern Utah too. I love the Uintas. I have such an affection for the Wasatch Mountains, Timpanogos, obviously, you know, Little Cottonwood Canyon where I skied a lot, and then the Uintas. And it was always odd to me how Utah was always characterized in these sort of extreme, erroneous ways. You know, it's like, you know, I know everyone in this room, if they're not personally subjected to this, is sort of like, oh, that's all about polygamy. You know, enough. You know, and Moab is very different. I have good friends from Moab. It's very different. In fact, the New York Times review, which was lovely, had Monument Valley there. That is not the world of Tom's Crossing. And so I did want to write about it, and I couldn't write about it. That's the other thing. I mean, I never wrote about Utah. And I finally said I had to write about it, you know. And I don't know if I succeeded, actually, you know. So feel free to sound off on whatever boards. Like, he got that wrong. Can't even spell Provo. You know, and just see. But I think just to toot my own horn. But I'm going to preface it with some advice for a novelist and young writers. In some ways, being a novelist, especially a novelist, is to be a poison taster. You have to become acquainted and somehow immunized against the poison of your own words. People say, oh, I just finished my first draft. I never want to see a first draft. You know, approach me after you've written your fifth draft. After it's so poisonous to return to your own words that you think you're going to die. And then write another 5 drafts. That's what being a professional writer is about. It's not journaling, and I love it, which is great, but it's about the finishing process, right? And so I was done. I mean, I'm done. It's there. I don't have to go back, right? Except we're doing an audiobook. And I'm the co-director. We have an amazing actor. And most books take about 3 days to record, okay? And you go in around 9, but you start recording at 10 a.m. and you go till 4 p.m. with a half an hour break. And you do not stop. You go over every single word. Sometimes you go again. You retake over and over and over. God, it's too much poison. And we are on day 14. And we just reached the halfway point. Okay? We have the 1,000-yard stare. This is my big break. When I get back from this tour, which is a week, we will go back into the studio and continue to record. And it's kind of amazing. because it's the book again. It's this incredible journey that the 3 or 4 of us, counting the engineer, depending, are going on. It's exhausting. And that's what I want you to feel in this book. I want you to be exhausted too, because you don't deserve the elations until you've made that climb. And as you make that climb, you will get stronger. You will look at other books and you'll be like, oh, that's easy. And that's what it's for. It is for expert, advanced readers. But I will say, when I'm there working on the audiobook, as hard as it is, I love those characters. I love where they're at. I'm immediately with them. And I'm speaking obliquely at this point because most of you haven't really read it at all. And but there are scenes that just come to me, and I just love. I'm grateful I had the chance to write them. I really am. And I will say, in a sort of spooky way, that when I started this, I was alone. I wanted to write it alone. And I say that with some emphasis because when I was working on the Familiar series, it involved finally a lot of people. There were translators, there were people that were researching, there were people that I was overseeing in terms of graphic design, and this was a 5-volume novel that was planned to be 27 volumes long. If you haven't heard about it, and I understand if you haven't, because it didn't work. It was like a television show that got canceled. And so when I started on this one, I was like, I'm going to write this on my own. And I thought it was going to be small. I thought it was going to be a little thing like that. And it was like, I've said this before, but it was like the voice of the woods. And I'm talking about these woods up here. I'm talking about the pine trees, the aspens, the birches. Maybe, I hope you've been up there if you're living there. I mean, the way the light flits on those just golden leaves and the birches are healing, and it's just so peaceful. And I'm like, you just have to go through here. And there's this lovely meadow, this lovely lake, and you can rest. And that's it. It's going to be easy. And whenever the voice of the forest tells you it's going to be easy, you should run the other way. Because by the time I got in there, I was on a steep, rocky, rubbled slope. And I was no longer talking to that voice. It was the voice of the mountain or something else. And it was moving through me. And I had only one job, and that was to allow it through me. In many ways, I don't feel I wrote this book. I can't describe the power of this voice. It was relentless. For years, I wrote alone. And my wife showed enormous faith in me that I was not losing it. Yeah.
So Utah.
Yeah, yes, Utah. So Utah was alive, it very much is alive, and I look forward to hearing from people who know it well. Oh, in the back, yes.
Well, I did have a gallery, so I haven't read it. I can speak to it.
All right, here we go.
Those of us in Utah, you'll get jokes that other people won't. Not jokes, but references like Switzerland switcheroo, the Zurich steel mill instead of Geneva steel. It's very good. I've heard of lots of things like that, so just wanted to say, everybody, it's really good on Utah. But my question is, those of us familiar with the Familiar know that Tom's Crossing is mentioned really early in volume 1. Is Tom's Crossing essentially a fractal footnote of the Familiar? And you see it in the sense that is.
I'm going to give you the actual answer. It's going to be really hard to understand, okay? But it is the closest that I can get to the truth, all right? So what this fine gentleman is saying with the Gravity's Rainbow t-shirt on, which I appreciate, is that in volume 1, there's a couple of pages called Tom's Crossing. And in many ways, it reiterates what happens in the prologue, basically, in Tom's Crossing. How does that relate to the Familiar, which was going to be 27 volumes long, about a girl who finds a kitten, to this book? And the thing is, I wanted to forget the Familiar. Like, it was a colossal failure. I am a novelist. I am not a professor. I do not get grant money. I make my living writing novels. And, by the way, there should be applause there. That's the most important point. And I am taking care of my family. So in some ways, the idea is that, hey, the familiar could do that, right? It involves a lot of people. It'll be magnificent, and I believe that, right? And I still think it is, but it's only 5 volumes. So when I started Tom's Crossing, it was going to be everything that the familiar wasn't. But here's the thing. That voice that I was talking about was always there. I mean, if you read, and he's read Tom's Crossing, there are passages that talk about the Greeks. And if we look at the Iliad, the War of Troy, suddenly one of the gods would inhabit the warriors. Sometimes they would impersonate the warriors, but sometimes they would inhabit them, and they would speak for them. And we've all had that feeling in a way, that something just a little beyond ourselves becomes. And so I think all the energy that was there for the familiar was not done. So what if it doesn't work? There is still a story to tell. And in many ways, Tom's Crossing is the story of the familiar. It's completely different. The characters are completely different. And you can make that connection that it had this sort of fractal, crystalline effect of like moving outward right after the familiar. But it responds to the very same energy. And when it was done, and it was gone. And that's why I'm a little sad. I don't know if it'll ever come back. It was an amazing experience, and I'm honored to have been able to write it and now to share it with you.
Firstly, I want to say thank you for waiting to add in your Google picture so we can all recognize you.
That's right.
For the actual question, I think it really plays off of what you were saying for the fractal familiarity. I haven't read your book. In fact, I've only just read a couple pages.
That would be tonight's pages.
There seems to be this tone of mystical realism that falls into it.
Wild speculation on 2 pages out of a 1,232 page
I also
book.
read the Wikipedia.
But I like it.
And correct me if I'm wrong. But was there an influence from, I think it was really common, really picked up the emphasis of mystical realism over the last 10 years, specifically in America. Was there influence from him, and if not, what authors did inspire into this pursuit?
Question is, what influence does Murakami have on Tom's Crossing? If you look at House of Leaves is very specific in its influences. I mean, it interrogates, in fact, its own influences, and there's long lists of basically all the books that went into the writing of House of Leaves. Murakami's a wonderful writer, and full of inspirations. Highly recommended if anyone here has not read him. The question of influence, though, gets a little bizarre with Tom's Crossing, because it really is a life's work. There is now a compaction and fermentation of all of this reading, all of this experience, and whatever metaphor we want to use, whether it's sourdough or a distillery hidden away in some deep, damp forest. There's a kind of, the experience is that I can't trace it in that way. That its voice became for me something far beyond anything that I've read. And I will maintain that. I have an enormous amount of faith in the book simply because I don't know another book that's like it. There are books that are thematically related, that have influenced it, and I welcome you all to trace those, because it will bring more joy. Those books that inform it are wonderful to read. But there's something strange about the book, and I can't understand it. I can't quite categorize it. It doesn't slot neatly. It isn't that neat. Yes.
Waiting for that moment for those pages to cross those timelines. Like, you speak of this now, you speak, when we open and talk about the break.
Yeah.
Like, is there intentionality in terms of, or can you talk a little bit more about what the intentions?
I missed the last part. A little louder.
Could you speak a little more to what isn't something like this?
So the question is what do I mean by when I say that there isn't something like this? In some ways, it's too spoilery. You know, it's just it's the way the music of the book itself is familiar. You know, the tropes of the Western. You know, in some ways of the horror genre, in some ways of the epic, and yet at the same time, it does this kind of syntactic dance between easy passages and very difficult passages, from perspectives within the characters, outside of the characters, within time. And at first, it can kind of read very easily. But I had to warn Penguin Random House Audio that the reading would be very difficult, because as simple as it may seem, they're just talking around a campfire, there's almost this kind of jazzy dance that starts to interrupt things. And then it does become difficult literally to perform. And this is a seasoned actor. And so, of course, I know what all of that is. But at the same time, when it's finished, that's where it is too big for me, in a way. It went beyond me. Yes, in the back.
You've said this often, but you say that that there's a life within your works. What pages do you have that state that, like, what I've written has life? What makes you that Frankenstein that builds those books into that size?
Well, it gets up off the table and starts terrorizing the town. And it's doing all right, because I don't see any burning torches around. I don't know. It's, you know, I don't know. I don't know how to describe it. I mean, what I'm asking myself is, am I just saying that just to sort of energize myself into the creation that I've done? You know, I mean, is it true? That's what I'm asking. Is it true? Do I really know if it has life or not? You know, I feel like what I can say is that it has time. I know how much time goes into it. And as you get better, if you are working your craft, you become more efficient, you become swifter. So there's even more time. And Tom's Crossing has an immense amount of time. And whether that constitutes life, I don't know. Maybe it is a mountain. Maybe it's like when you look at a mountain, it has a geological life, but does it have life? But nonetheless, when you read it, it's not something that was just spat out of a large language model. You're like, oh, there was risk here. You know, blood was spent. You know, there is a fall. You know, and the one metaphor that comes up a lot in my mind is like Alex Honnold climbing El Capitan. You know, it's just like, that's what Tom's Crossing is. And it's the climbing of it's free soloing El Capitan. And it's making it. And when it was done, it was like, I did it. And this is, we're just talking, you know, and you're really like, well, I don't know. I'm not saying it's great. I'm not saying it's good. I'm not saying anything, except I know what was done. And it's just someone who's practiced this for so long. I'm like, that's a really hard one to do. And that's what's there, you know. And so I guess that's what I can say. So the question is how I empathized with the characters but also did I empathize with the voice? No. It was too terrifying, you know. Yes, I respected the voice, I guess. It was like respecting the wall of a mountain or an immense wave. You know, it's what generates everything. But there's a passage that I love, and it's a very spooky passage, but it talks about how you cannot know the mind of the ghost. And it's at the end of chapter 4. And I think that's really the answer to it. I feel like there's this other room back there, and there in fact is another room. Are there any hands waving there? Because I don't want you guys to get lost.
I was rereading House of Leaves kind of the celebration. There's a passage about kind of the veracity of the house. But it's how to create something so easily. So when people go and know that House of Leaves is and it was going to a new era where AI is doing shared reality for everyone. How does that affect your kind of attempt to bring truth into your fiction? What is that? How does that affect your process?
Lovely question. Gentleman brings up, you know, how House of Leaves is very concerned with how we verify the stories within it. And if you ask me, that's why House of Leaves, it's a great point, continues to find readers. As much as Hollywood wants to think it's about a house that's scary and dark, it's really about how our stories are scary and dark. And we are very much confronted with that. And in some ways, and I'll say this a bit boldly, actually very boldly, I think House of Leaves, in a way, trains you to be able to navigate questionable narratives and find the narrative that works, you know. And that's what Johnny's doing. His narratives are all off, but slowly he can begin to figure out his way, you know, to begin to uncover what are the salient points that can allow him to get out of the house, right? Tom's Crossing is definitely getting out of the house, getting out of the city, you know, getting out of all that, the culture wars, awakening again to like the world that we're in, right? This, and in Utah, this resplendent beauty, right? That's right there that we all know, and yet is also at risk as we watched Great Salt Lake begin to get drier and drier and drier and threaten, you know, the city. So, you know, how do we do that? Well, I mean, one way was there was no spell check when I was writing, okay? All of those like things were turned off, you know? I was writing on a computer, but I was frequently with pencils. I was not checking things, you know, that came later. But the main thing was to move as possible as without ropes, without pitons, you know, without maps in a way, and proceed in that way, you know. I mean, I embarrassed myself so many times of misspelling something, looking back like, that's not how you spell accommodate. I can never tell it. And then, sure, you know, I slowly found these things, but I was writing to the point, this voice was so clear that it became difficult to actually see the words, you know. And I learned that this was the case even with copy editors who are trained in this final process of that there is something so vivid about the book that if you find your way to it and you find that voice and it's moving, you will lose hold of the text in a way, and then you'll really fly. So, you know, that was the purpose of it in a way, and I think it does that. You know, I am the large language model right here. Yes.
So when I read House of Leaves, you're so good at haunting the reader and allowing them to kind of forcing them to slow down and really take in the text and be immersed in it. And I feel like Tom's Crossing will be the same with the voice. That will be kind of the structure that allows us to slow down and kind of be haunted by this text. And I'm curious as to what still haunts you from House of Leaves and from Tom's Crossing.
What is haunting me? Oh gosh. I have to dig. know if I have an answer. There are jokes that come to mind. They're not very good. And then there's kind of the thingness, right? We're haunted by, something sad, by a regret. I think the hauntings that I experience are more, it's just such a great question. And I really think the end of Tom's Crossing answers it. It is what happened to my hauntings, and I don't want to tell you, because I won't ruin or even compromise a great moment, but it's not just my hauntings. I mean, the book it's inhabited by so many dead. So many. And that my responsibility, someone who's almost 60, was no longer about just my dead, but others. And that was huge. Still is. And that journey is part of Tom's Crossing. What happens at the end still kind of gets me.
More. Your
Oh, I
past.
already picked you. There are other people. Okay, all right, one more. All right.
Your past works are known for being the way you present the words being as brilliant as the words themselves with your erotic literary style. Were you tempted to go down that rabbit hole with this book? Or did that just be way too much?
Was I tempted to return to the ergodic literature of House of Leaves?
Well,
Not
no,
once.
no, no.
You're talking to the guy who wrote Only Revolutions too. I mean, talk about shrugging loose a lot of House of Leaves fans right there.
Only Revolutions was brilliant. Yes.
No, not at all. Only Revolutions was one of the greatest books I wrote. I mean, it just freed me. So many writers get caught in that prison. Like, I was successful at this. I mean, writers, artists, musicians, everything. And I was like, I'm gonna do this. And my friend calls it Paul's Boutique. It's just like, it's the thing that finally gave me, I don't know, the freedom to move laterally and think laterally. So I haven't looked back, really. And this was it. I mean, I will say the weirdest thing is this, like, I don't know what I'm gonna write next. I don't have a glimmer. I don't even know if I have the energy to write anything again. That is how complete Tom's Crossing is. Really. It's just, it may have left me. I may be done. I don't know. I mean, I shouldn't say this because Pantheon, I owe them another book. But I'm like, it's like that was something. That was special. Like, I was visited with something. And I hope you guys find the Tom's Crossing special. And I know some of you will, but I don't know. Yes?
I'm curious about your background and experience with Westerns and how that informed your novel, but also like what you feel like maybe you add to the genre of Western with Tom's Crossing.
So the question is my personal connection to the genre of the Western, right? I live in the West. It's a coastal West. My formative years were here, Utah Valley. I loved Westerns, the movies.
Do you go back to like old-time Westerns?
Oh yeah, all the way. Yeah.
What speaks to you? What do you like about
Well, this is the.
Westerns?
Oh, you mean just?
Movies, books, like that kind of Western. What do you connect?
I think we're looking at it backwards, actually, because it's not. The Western kind of materialized in the story that was being told. I didn't write House of Leaves and say, oh, it's a horror book. Like, I've never paid attention to genre, ever. So, kind of like the elements began to sort of arrange themselves as a Western. And I was like, oh, this is kind of fun. This is in the West. And it relates to a lot of what I Well, I mean, getting back to the earlier question about the validity of narratives, right? We were given a certain narrative for the Western, and it was wrong. And so that was fascinating too, to have these childhood stories and realize like, oh wow, this wasn't just some open plain that I could just set down stakes. Like this was a very complicated move, you know, which is not to also, by the way, I mean, it's also incredibly tricky, you know, I mean, it is like, you have to look as a historian, which I'm not, at those times about what I mean, it was a war, it was a bloody place everywhere. But at the same time, I think I wanted to sort of interrogate what was the meaning of the Western. And for me, it gets very simple. It's about the horses. It really is about those horses. It's about something that's not us. It's about something, the horses came from North America. Isn't that amazing? I mean, then they went to Europe. They went to China and Mongolia, you know? And then they came back. They started here. They may have well started right around Utah. I mean, like, it's kind of, they're incredible creatures, you know? And they're terrifying too. If anyone's ever ridden them, and if you ride them fast, they will bite you, they will throw you, they will cripple you and kill you, all of it. But the majesty of that and the kinship of that, which I have experienced, I have worked with horses, and I know that there is this sublime interaction that takes place. And you can look anywhere. You can, there are wonderful movies about people whose lives are restored by being around horses. But there's no one in this room, I would wager, who hasn't been stressed out because of a situation at home or at work, and hasn't taken a drive or walked out into these mountains and felt renewed. It's amazing. And we can't forget that. We can't be looking at tiny little screens, you know, constantly interrupted by this, you know, this ravenous culture that wants, you know, our attention, you know, that wants to monetize it, you know. We have to look at the leaves. We have to look at the sky. We have to feel the earth. We have to talk to the animals. We have to be naive about it and at the same time willing to address the realities of it. We have to get into that business. The problem right now is that so much that we are looking at online is just regenerating its own content. That's what I see, as simply put as possible. You have a world that doesn't care anything about what's living on the shell of this world. It is a massive body that is moving around other massive bodies with huge fusions of energy that are radiating and changing everything. They couldn't care less about us. And then we have this wonderful culture that has become so interior that it's no longer seeing what's going on out here. And so people don't want to know what's going on in the mountains by going up into the mountains. They just want to ask ChatGPT, how are the mountains? And ChatGPT's going to hallucinate and tell you based on what other people think is going on in the mountains, right? The work is in between. The work is getting real content so that we can process it with these amazing tools we've developed. That's where the real work comes in. Scientists who are measuring the bark every single season, you know, the snowfall, getting out there, doing that part. That's what I think. All right, I've said enough. It's so great to see you. I can see the hook is there, and I have to go sign. Thank you very much. I'm happy to sign your books. I'm happy to personalize them. Write your name down. I recognize that guy. Happy to take selfies. Just tell me. Anything else?
I'll give the signing line instructions down there.
All right.
So, we'll dismiss Mark. He's going to go sit up where he's going to be signing. Another round of applause, please.
I know he said I have the hook, you know, get him to stop, but if it was my decision, we'd keep going. What an incredible night. Again, thank you for being here, for your questions and guiding that discussion and pulling out all of those extra stories from Mark. Y'all are wonderful. So, some signing line instructions. So first and foremost, the whole store is shoppable. We will be keeping the registers open probably for another 45 minutes, 40 minutes. And so I would highly recommend, rather than just twiddling your thumbs in the line the entire time, go shop the store. It's open to you, and I promise everybody will get their book signed. We're not going to let Mark go away until everybody has had their lunch, okay? We're holding him hostage. I don't know if you acknowledge that or not. So, how is this going to work? So, behind y'all, there's one set of stairs up here storage, and then up a couple little steps up to a table where Mark is. I will be at the bottom of those stairs with sticky notes. You cannot go see Mark until you see me. I'm going to be the one to write down your names, okay? He said he is willing to personalize as many books as you want personalized, and he will sign as many books as you want signed. So, love that for each of you. We gotta make sure we get you all the sticky notes, okay? And I'll help you turn to the right page, all of that fun stuff. I would suggest getting to know the person behind you in line. Hand them your phone. They can take some pictures for you, some candidates. And like Mark said, he is willing to take some selfies, okay? After you visit the table with Mark, there is a sneaky back staircase. So you're going to just keep going straight and follow the curve around to the right, and then there's a staircase that will pop you out right by the front desk. Does that make sense? Okay. Please be kind. Please be courteous. Please, again, feel free to shop the store so you're not just waiting in line the whole time. If you would be so kind, there's only 2 of us booksellers here for the rest of the night. Once you get up out of your chair and you start touching the other room, if you wouldn't mind folding it up and maybe just lay it up against the bookshelf in the back, that would help us so much in the cleaning up process. Thank you again for being here.